Well, welcome everybody. This is episode 9 of I Care About Books. This book in particular was picked out by my cousin Angela, and I can't wait to get into it. So let me introduce tonight's guests. Graham McGaw, founder of Book Notification, is here. Hi, Graham. And my cousin Angela, a librarian in Ottawa, also joining us this evening. We're missing Vince, but we'll forgive him this time because he'll be back next time with us. As always, we want to remind you that this is going to contain spoilers. So if you have not yet read this book, be aware of that before you go ahead and take a listen through the entire thing. Also, a little bit of a trigger warning. Sometimes we use profanity, and this book might actually come with a little bit of that when we're discussing it, so be aware of that as well. We read for this episode The Bittlemores, the debut novel by singer-songwriter Jan Arden, and it was Angela's pick, so I will throw it over to Ange to give us a synopsis of the book and why you picked it.
So just to be clear, it wasn't her debut book; it was her debut work of fiction. So let's give her that credit, because she did write two memoirs also. In the meantime, well, it's taking 14 years to write this one. One of the reasons I picked it was because I actually went to a book talk where she was being interviewed by Rick Mercer, and of course the two of them together are fantastic. And she described the kind of process that she went through, falling in love with her characters, and how could you not, because it was just hysterical. And as I mentioned to you when we first started, the thing I walked away from having read this the first time was how funny the book was. And of course, I went back to reread it in preparation for this podcast, and there was a lot of horrific parts in there. And I was like, really, is this going to get funny? When is this going to get funny? But what is amazing about this book is just that she can take things that are preposterous and just talk about them like they're real. And why couldn't the cow spell? You know, like, if you just present it in such a way that it could happen, maybe it could, right? And so I think at the end, when she's kind of bringing all these characters together that she's built up and just brings you into that epic last scene, and it all makes sense. Why did this, police officer have to find this coin that was tucked in a diaper of the baby that was stolen? And just like all of these threads, just tie them all together with a bow, and there we go. And the story ends. And you're left with this everybody got what they deserved feeling.
Well put. That was extraordinarily well put. Yes. For one, I thought this book was fantastic. Graham, what did you think of The Bittlemores?
Well, the first thing that really stood out to me that I thought was kind of funny is that I just recently reread Animal Farm. So the cows talking, the pigs talking, I didn't bat an eyelid. I'm just like, yep, animals talk, that's it. I was waiting for them to say 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, The second thing that stuck out to me is Jan Arden is fucked in the head. Thank you for the sweating trigger warning, because I almost like DNF'd this book. I got to do it 6-7 times during the first 20%, because the amount of animal cruelty in this book was horrific. If you're someone out there, like, this is a big trigger one, if you're someone out there who is bothered by animal cruelty, not only do not read this book, do not listen to this podcast, because we are going to discuss it. In the first 20%, here's what happened. Like I said, I gave you a trigger warning. In the first 20%, kittens are drowned, they're stomped on, they're hung up on the wall. A cow gets its ribs kicked, it gets its tail cut off, they get ears cut off, the dogs get shot, because why not? The very first, like Angela said, I went into this book kind of blind, and all I read was like comic and humor and hilarious, and I'm sitting there going, oh my god, am I reading the wrong book? Like, am I reading like, I don't even know what I was reading, but I stuck with it thanks to this podcast. Otherwise, I would have quit. I was like, legit, I was like, I was not enjoying it. And I ended up loving the book, I gotta say.
Wow, great God. I actually have to say that I am shocked. And of course, Ange and I are trying to be very, very polite right now and not giggle and laugh while Graham is going off on this like severe tangent about how he felt about the book. I did not realize that this would have gotten you as much as it did, knowing what you have read and knowing what is already, books that are that always make your TBR. So I'm a little surprised that this book got to you as badly as it did.
Oh, animal cruelty is a thing that really bothers me. Who was the author? Holly Jackson, Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Spoiler alert, she randomly murders a dog during that the book. Now, it's a fiction dog, whatever, but she kills this dog in the book. I went to like a talk with Holly Jackson, and like my daughter had to basically beg me not to do a Q&A and yell, "Why did you kill the effing dog? Why would you do that?" Young adults are reading this book. It really bothers me because I feel like there is times for animal cruelty. That feels like an awful sentence to say. Don't take that out of context. There is times for animal cruelty. It's okay to be cruel to animals sometimes, but it has to be well done. I felt this was just right off the bat. It's in there, and I guess maybe it means you're meant to hate the characters. But I felt they actually established that by everything they did to the humans, to the daughter, like with locking it away and all that stuff. So it felt very unnecessary and overly savage, really. It was like there was more animal cruelty and savagery in this than one of those Netflix How the Sausage is Made documentaries, it was pretty bad.
Now, I do want to. I have to stress that Ange and I aren't giggling over the contents of this book, but rather, I don't think, and Ange, I think you can agree with me, I don't think I've ever seen Graham so invested in why he didn't like a book before. How about you?
But then at the end, he did say he liked it. Did he?
I loved it, actually. Yes, I did. I got through it, but I pushed through, and I think I was actually messaging Kaya at like 10%, like, oh my God, I'm so close to DNFing, but I got to push through. It's going to get better. They kills another cat, and I'm like, oh my God, they tries to drown this cat. I'm like, oh my God. But I kept pushing through, waiting for it. And while I don't think that stuff was actually necessary, the book did get, yes, really, really good. And it grew and grew on me as it went. So I went from liking it to loving it really overall. So it was overall a very good recommendation. Just, I could have did without kittens being drowned and stuff like that. But you guys are fine with it, but I'm not.
I mean, the tail, like, yes, it's savage for her tail to have been cut off, but if he wasn't that cruel, then it wouldn't have made sense for the animals to need to react in the way they did. So it had to exist in that way so that the characters at the end, when they get their what's coming to them, it makes sense, right? There has to be a reason why these people are going to prison forever. Yes, they stole a baby, but like there has to be the layers, because you're looking at how Harp changed, because he was such a good little kid who loved his mom and loved his dog. And these are all the things that happened to him because of his unfortunate circumstances. And so it's watching him spiral down. And part of the spiral is they're not able to contain the secret anymore. And that was their ultimate downfall.
That was actually something that stuck out to me, though, was it's interesting you brought up, because I actually thought, like, I kind of get that, but I felt like his character development was actually really lacking. Like he was a good little boy with his brother and all that, and then he went off with his bad uncle and all that. But it just seemed to go from like 0 to 10, where he went from being this, kind of having a hard life, but a good boy, to just this utter savage, Dr. Kevorkian nightmare character, like it just, I actually felt that was one part where the book was lacking, where I was waiting for it to explain how exactly he turned that way, and instead it just seemed to go from nothing to extreme,
Alcohol.
I think in my interpretation, it was those 4 years with his uncle. It was the 4 years with his uncle with the severe mental and physical abuse that resulted in who he ended up ultimately becoming. That's kind of what my interpretation was of the book. I do think that we should give a little bit broader of a synopsis of the book itself, just to sort of explain, because I think that we're so passionate about this book because it really was a wonderful book. So let's try and get right to the heart of what this story was. Angela, I'm going to give it back to you to give us like a real full-on synopsis of the story.
Okay. So this couple that lives on the farm very much wants a child, and the woman is unsuccessful in having her own child. So she comes up with this great idea, which is all these other people who have multiple children, they're not going to miss one. Let's just take it from them. So she plans this elaborate plot where her husband goes into the hospital and takes the baby, and has to be a baby girl, and a specific one, although he did end up grabbing the wrong one. And they raise this child as their own. And then, to spite her parents, this child at the age of 14 decides to get pregnant so that she can ruin their reputation. And of course, they don't want anyone to know that she's pregnant, so they lock her up for 5 months. She gives birth and runs away the night of the night the baby is born, and makes off with this truck driver, and kind of lives her life for another 14 years, trying to build up the courage to come home and take her baby back, but writing to her every month. And the mom takes all the letters and hides them in the attic, and nobody knows that these letters are being sent. So that's kind of the main plot story. And then the daughter, the granddaughter, as she's growing up, realizes that her parents are not her parents, they're her grandparents, and she's trying to find out who her real mother is. But at the same time, they're living on a farm, and the father, as we mentioned, is cruel to animals, and the animals have their own characters who are trying to escape from the situation that they find themselves in. So that's sort of, I guess, the broad crux of it.
I think exactly. And I think you sort of already touched on it a little bit, Angela, but I'm going to get you to go a little bit further in your thoughts on it. I love how Jan Arden writes. She wrote so matter-of-factly. There was no, even though it was such I don't want to, it was like she wasn't embellishing, even though what she was talking about was so outrageous. And yet she didn't feel like, when I was reading her words, that she wasn't embellishing the story, despite the fact that she's writing a story that is so fanatical. And I loved her writing style. It was, this is what happened when this happened, and here's how it happened. And I'm going to tell you the story of how it happened. And then she continues throughout the book. I didn't realize she was going to do this, that she keeps changing character point of views. So at one point she's writing from, Willa, the granddaughter / daughter's point of view. She's writing as a third person. She's writing, and that part I found to be really interesting, that she kept changing these POVs chapter by chapter. What did you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the things I loved about it. Because when she's speaking as the omnipotent narrator, she just gets in everybody's head, right? And so she's telling you how somebody feels, even though, I guess she's an omnipotent narrator, but most authors, I think, struggle with that point of view question, where they're like, how do I tell this story so that I can get in everybody's head? And she just didn't seem to care. It's like, I'm just going to tell you what he thought about that, even though I'm not telling it from that character's point of view. And so that gives you a lot of insight. I noticed it particularly with the uncle that I'd looked after Harp, when she would just say, yes, this is how he thinks and feels, but not from his perspective, just from, the third party narrator. So that, I think she did really well. But yes, I think that there was that one big secret, the one big secret being that they'd stolen this baby. And she didn't need to pile on all these additional secrets and whatever, because that was a big enough secret. And so just the way that she can reveal that one thing slowly and build all of the characters around it, because the constable that ended up solving the case was one of the best characters in this book, right? And she just, she was introduced later on, and just a kind of unassuming new cop, and in a town where nobody cares about anything, and she could have just sat on her desk and waited out the time at this small town and eventually gone to to a big city where she wanted to be. And instead of doing that, she's like, no, I'm going to solve this. You know, even if I have to pay for my own hotel room, even if no one will ever thank me, even if, you know, my boss doesn't care enough to even know my name, I'm just going to do my job.
Graham, what did you think of the book in terms of plausibility? Because I felt like while I was reading it, I was like, oh, like this just happened. Like the way she wrote it, I can't stress that enough about it being so matter of fact. Like even the animals talking didn't seem weird or fanatical to me. I was like, of course they do, because she told me they do. And I believe that they do. There was such a crazy believability in this book. Like, of course Harp drove, 200 kilometers to this neighboring town, walked into a hospital, walked out with a baby. And there was, and I do want to add this part to it. I didn't find anywhere in the book where they explained how they got Margaret. They explained how they passed off Willa, the granddaughter, as though she was their own. But there wasn't a direct point in the story where they explained how Margaret came to be. I just wanted to add that. But in terms of plausibility, Graham, what did you think? Did you find while you were reading the book that you were like, yeah, that tracks? It seems like it really happened.
Well, yeah, it's like if you bullet point the plot to someone, it sounds ridiculous. You know, you've got animals talking, animals writing in the ground. You know, you've got the baby kidnapping, the silver doll in the diaper. You've got this country bumpkin cop who's solving all these cases and then goes for this cold case that hasn't been cracked in 30 years, and she manages to ask questions that no one else has asked. Like, it all sounds so ridiculous, but you're right. It's extremely plausible. Everything that happened in the book, I was believing. It didn't matter. There wasn't anything, that can be an issue with books. There wasn't anything where I was like, this is too outrageous. Everything just, the grandmother trying to poison them with soup and the cat flies through the air and all that. I'm like, yep, I can see that. I believed everything. Like, aliens could have landed and I'd be like, yep, that happens, So, yeah, it was very, very unique in that sense that anything that happened in this book, you actually believed was completely plausible.
So I'm going to add to that, and I'll let you both weigh in. It sounds funny to say continuity in a book like this because the book itself is so outrageous and so colors outside of the lines. But if I'm getting into the nitty gritty, there was one thing that stood out to me that drove me a little bit nuts. The continuity of where they were. It felt like we kept jumping between, was this a farm in like Alberta or was this a farm in like Maryland? Because the narration, and this is strictly about the narration of the book, this is not about the book itself or the story itself. Jan kept going back and forth between American and Canadian over and over again. Sometimes she wrote in miles, sometimes she wrote in kilometers, sometimes she talked about Abraham Lincoln, sometimes she talked about Anne Murray. And for a while there, I was like, I thought this book was set in Canada. And then there was a part where towards the end of the book that Margaret and Tizzy are coming back to the back hills and they're talking about going to the prairies and so on and so forth. And that was when it solidified for me. Okay, yes, this book is supposed to be set in Canada, but I found some serious continuity errors that really flustered me throughout the story. Did either of you pick that up? And I'll start with you, Angela.
Yeah, so I mean, knowing that Jan is Canadian kind of made me think Canada, even without any of the specific points in the book. And I'm glad you brought up Anne Murray because I found that interesting too, since she is an artist, that she was talking about different Canadian artists and the songs that they were singing. But I did find that a couple of times, particularly with where Margaret ended up, because that was really unclear because she's bouncing all over the place and it was never, not never, but you didn't always know where she was. And because her best friend is a trucker who's obviously being all over the place, then it wasn't always clear where Margaret was at in terms of whether she was in Canada or the US. But it did seem kind of clear that, I say kind of clear, I thought the farm was in Canada. And one of the things too was with the constable, her big dream was to be a cop in Toronto, where she was from. So that kind of tied it back as well.
So I'm going to add to that because, yes, although there was a part in the book where Willa said she felt like she was there with the FBI. And I was like, but that's American. Like, why are we were going back and forth, and there were so many. And so that was one for me that really stuck out, was like, it was never clear, like clearly a Canadian book. And I'll go back to Louise Penny. It was very obvious throughout the entire story, end to end, even if she hadn't told us that it was set in Montreal or outside of Montreal, that it was a Canadian book. And this one seemed to jump back and forth. Did you find that, Graham?
Well, I'm not a big geography buff. It's like my worst subject in school, all that stuff. So that type of thing, I didn't really focus on. I just kind of take that in. They could have mentioned the RCMP and then the Mounties and then the NASA, all this, and I would just been like, okay, it's all the same. We're all one people. We're not split by national. I don't know, but I actually did have continuity errors that I noticed that did bother me, different from that, which is kind of funny because, like you said, it's a very believable book. No matter all the implausible stuff, you believe it all. But there was just so many little. There was a lot of little things, like for example, it's made clear that the grandparents listen outside the door when she's in there with her friend Carla, but then she bluts out the secret anyway in the bedroom, and it's like, wait, why isn't there a section saying they should check to make sure they aren't there or that they weren't around? And then another one that stuck with me, and it happened twice, is after the first letter received by the daughter, she rents a PO box in town so that the mail all goes there and she doesn't have to keep racing to get to it. But then twice that PO box isn't a factor. Like later on, the mail is delivered and she runs to the mailbox in front of Willa and takes the mail and sticks it down her bra. And then later on, the postcard gets delivered to the neighbor, which is a little bit. There was a few little bit too convenient things like that, like just to kind of tie that in when she's going through the microfiche in the library and she just happens to jump forward 50 years to land right on this picture of a woman who looks just like her, So there was definitely those, I'd say, flaws in general. That's what they are, is flaws that did take away from the book for me. That was a kind of continuity that bothered me, not the whole country aspect, but just little things like that.
What do you think, Ange?
For me, it was the latter. And it's funny when you say her finding the person who looked like her in the microfiche. As you're saying that, I'm like, yeah, it didn't hit me when I was reading it, but the fact that the dad had left a ladder leaning up against the window on the night she needed to escape, that was like, that one made my eyes roll. That was the one moment you're like, as if, and she just says, it was very, my dad just happened to, like, whatever, the way she described it, I'm like, no, that one isn't good enough. Like, the fact that she was in the library, because they went to the library often and because, they were looking up something for a project, that was like, okay, fine. And they came across this. I gave her that one, but the latter one was the one for me.
And when I read this, the one I thought would stick out to you after we read Once There Were Wolves, I thought you were going to comment on her leaving the night she gave birth after being stitched up. Because if you
all the blood, yes.
If you throw it back in that podcast episode, Angela was not having it that this woman gave birth in the woods by herself. When I read this passage about her sneaking out of the house in the rain, down the ladder with these crudely stitched stitches in her very, very delicate lady parts after giving birth at the age of 15, I thought for sure you'd say something about that.
Yes, and the trucker letting her in the truck, even though she's clearly bleeding all over the place, like that was a bit much, but at least, so in Once There Were Wolves, the thing that made me crazy wasn't just that she bit through the umbilical cord, it's just that the character that had been developed was this type of character who should have carried a knife. So why didn't she just have a knife to cut that umbilical cord?
What did you think about the B characters in this particular book? Like the characters of Nola, the bully at school, Carol's parents, right? They had this whole backstory about Willa's best friend Carol's parents and how one was going to lose his job and one's an alcoholic and so on. And there were a bunch of B characters in this book. Do you think that they made the book a little richer, or do you think that we could have done without all these extra little backstories? Go ahead, Graham.
The Nola character actually really bothered me because she was this mean girl throughout the book, you know, very nasty kind of human being. One we all know that type of person. And then she gets in trouble and she breaks down crying and saying, "Don't tell my mother." And immediately Willa's like excusing her, like, "Oh, I guess we don't know how people actually have it in life. Now she's got a tough life." It's like, wait a minute. This girl has been a bully all throughout the book. And she breaks down crying once, and suddenly it's like, well, you don't know what other people are going through. Like, come on, you know what I mean? And then next thing you know, they're not best friends, but they're painting away and all this stuff. And it was so that one bothered me. Like, yeah, I did enjoy that. I did think the B characters brought a lot to the book. I did enjoy what they brought, and like I said, up until that point, the Noah character was good. I was kind of waiting to see what she would do, you know, like, you know, every time there's a scene in the school, you're like, uh-oh, is this going to be when she gets her revenge for a broken nose and all that? And then that was kind of a cop-out, but the rest of the characters were really good. I thought they really added to it, and she did a great job of establishing them and giving them their own voice, making them recognizable and all that.
Let's talk the imagery. Now, I love Jan Arden as a songwriter. I have always have, and because as a lyricist, I've always been like, oh, I get what she was going through in the moment she sang this song. So I really didn't, I wasn't surprised that the imagery in my mind, I thought was so well done. I thought she was able to describe and without reservation or filter. Like, she had no problem describing shit, as well as she was describing what the constellation of stars look like up in the sky when Willa would go out to the roof just to get a moment to herself. So, Ange, what did you think of the imagery in this book and the way that Jan Arden was able to bring the environment to life?
I think that's one of the things that separates good books from great books is when they can do metaphors properly, right? And so, like, cheesy metaphors are one of my pet peeves, right? And so that's something I'm always kind of looking out for. But Jan Arden, my favorite one was, you could hear a nickel drop on a chicken, right? Like, that's fantastic, right? Everybody else says, oh, you could hear a pin drop. They just use the old tired ones that have been recycled 1,000 times. And she comes up with all this stuff, and it's not just creative, but it also links back to the story, right? Because here we are on a farm, so of course the metaphor has to be something related to a chicken. And I mean, I can visualize that farm. I know exactly where we are. I can see the barn, I can see the cows, I can see Tizzy driving her 18-wheeler. Like, that moment at the end when everybody's coming together, that was so easy to picture. So I think she really brings that to life, and that's just the way she tells the story. And yeah, she's fantastic with words.
I have to say that I thought it was so on brand that Mrs. Bittlemore required the girls to call her Mrs. B. I thought that was just so clever. And when you're getting into character development for Jan Arden to write this character, that not only was she this very detached woman who was like devoid of emotion, that she would require the daughters she claimed to have wanted to refer to her as Mrs. B. I thought that part was really, really clever in terms of knowing your character the way that they do. But could you not see Mrs. Bittlemore? Like, of all the characters in this book, she must have been, in my opinion, one of the best written characters in a book. I could see her, I could smell her, I could hear her, I could and when she would sit there, she wasn't just drinking whiskey. Like, Jan Arden went as far as to say she was drinking brandy, cherry brandy out of a teacup. And I was like, yep, if this woman was going to be doing anything, that's what she would. I could also imagine that despite all of her heinous flaws, horrible things about her, she was a sensational cook. So even while she's making this poison soup at the end of the book, I'm like, that sounds delicious. and the contrast being that she, you know, needs chicken for her broth that she's making on the stove. So she, in Jan's words, not mine, people, okay, she waddles out to the farmyard, snatches a hen up from the property, just snaps its neck, plucks out its feathers, and drops it into the stew. Like that just sounds to me like that would exactly be the kind of character that she is. I thought she was one of the most well-written characters throughout the book. Graham, what about you? Who is your favorite character?
She was very well written, actually. I haven't even really thought about who my favorite character was, but I think it was she definitely right up there. Like you said, the writing, like Jan Alden did such a great job of describing her to the point that I didn't even want to visualize her. Like you say, you could smell her, stuff like that. Like she managed to do it to that point where you're like, nope, I got to stop trying to visualize this human being. It's not good for my mental health to picture someone in this condition. But I would say she's right up there. The cop was probably my favorite. I loved that whole entire story arc. I loved everything to do with her. The whole, you know, who doesn't love cold cases? But just her whole process going through it all. And let's say she was like a quirky kind of almost like country bumpkin cop, it felt like, even though I didn't give her that much of a backstory. But it just worked so well, and she was a great character. So obviously the cop was my favorite character.
All right. And over to you. Favorite character?
Yeah, that's a difficult one, just because favorite usually means the person you like the most. And I wouldn't say
no.
No.
I gotta no. Mrs. Bittlemore is not what I like the most. She was my favorite because
best described character.
The one that stood out the most.
I think that when you're talking about how they passed Margaret off as their own, that's one of the reasons why she continually emphasized the size of this woman. I mean, talking about counting how many times obsidian was mentioned in another book you read, how many times did she say that Mrs. Bittlemore was fat, right? And so it's not just so you can picture what she looks like, it's also to explain how babies can come out of her without her being pregnant visibly, right? So that was kind of the plausibility factor, where it's like, yes, this woman could have been pregnant and not known because of her size. But yeah, I mean, I think as far as one of them that I would have wanted to spend time with, that would have been the cop. If I think about, you know, the one that impressed me the most, I don't know if there was if it was someone who had like the hero of the story, it's going to be a cow, right? Like it's Burl is the hero. So if we're allowed to pick animal favorites, I mean, it's probably Burl.
You can pick animal favorites, of course you can. I'm surprised it wasn't like Chrissa, who was like able to write words with her hoof in the dirt. But okay, Burl.
Yeah, her mom taught her that, so you know, no problems there. She wasn't the leader of the pack, right? Like that was Burl. She's like, I'm gonna figure out a way, and she was the first one to attack Harp, right? She's like, why am I putting up with this? I can just kill him, you know.
Right. All right, we're at that time in the podcast where we are going to rank this book at a 10 bells. Graham, we will start with you. Where does the Bittlemores land for you out of 10 bells?
Like I said, it started as a DNF for the first 20%, multiple times, ready to cancel it. Around the 50% mark, it was, I'd say about a 6 out of 10. Kept getting better. I was ready for a begrudging 7 out of 10. By the end of the book, 8 out of 10. Although, can we just say, Angela, I know you loved the ending and how it wrapped up, and I do agree with you, but that silver coin being worth $7.5 million after they thought it was 50,000 was ludicrous. But then the fact that they're like, nah, we're not going to sell it. We don't want $7.5 million. That was the one thing with the ending that I'm like, come on, it's a coin. You just got your kidnapped child back and a new granddaughter. You don't need this nostalgic coin. But 8 out of 10, easy, very highly recommended if you can get past the torturing of animals that take place for a large portion of the book.
That has got to say something about this book. When somebody will start off by saying, I nearly didn't finish it, but then does and gives it an 8 out of 10. That has got to speak to how great this book really and truly is. I thought that was really cool, Graham, that you went from, I ain't going to finish this thing, to giving it an 8. That's pretty amazing. Angela, over to you. Out of 10 bells.
I feel like it's a victory that I got Graham to give my book 8 out of 10 bells. I just really, really wanted you to like it. And I will rank it in a second, but I just wanted to say that, you know, if they had sold the coin, I would have agreed that $7.5 million was ridiculous. But because they decided not to sell it, it almost didn't matter what the coin was worth. It was just, you know, the fact that they did what was unusual. You would have expected, because they were building up to, they're going to sell this coin to make the farm work. And so because she didn't go with the kind of cliche, everybody's expecting this answer, she was like, oh, by the way, Tizzy just saved up all this money and she can, you know, give it to you so you can run the farm. I thought it was a small twist, but it's a good kind of end twist where, like, I didn't see that coming. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I'd give it 8 out of 10 as well. I've read this book twice, and I guess I would say I loved it more the first time, just because you can't be as shocked when you read something the second time. But there are very few books out there that I like to commit to reading more than once. And one of the reasons I picked this was to read it again.
I think it's a great metric. Would I read the book again? So I'm coming off of last week's podcast when I ranked our book 10 Bells, When You Reach Me by Rebecca Steed. I want to clarify for everybody who watches this podcast, that was a 10 out of 10 for me, because I think every child should read that book. Okay. So that I need to clarify. Okay. So this book here, I'm going to give it a pretty high grade. I'm going to give it a 9 because I thought it was fantastic. I'm not giving it a 10 because it's not on a children's scale. As an adult, though, I thought you need to read it once. It was one of those books. And I think, Angela, you're right on the mark on this one. Reading it a second time doesn't shock you nearly as much. And this book did exactly that. It shocked you. It twisted you up. It made you go, what, are there people out there in the world actually living like this? And the ending was fabulous. It tied everything off neatly. It gave sort of a closure. Whether or not you agreed with it, there was still a closure. And I appreciate that. And I think that's a sign of a good book, that even if you don't necessarily like the way the characters ended things, it still ended neatly on the characters' terms. So I'm going to give this a 9. Also kind of biased because Jan Arden is one of my favorite artists. So 9 for me. And coming up for next week, it'll be episode 10. So no pressure here, Graham. You've got a recommendation for us for next week's podcast, next month's podcast. Go ahead, tell us what it is.
Yeah, so for the March book club pick, I wanted to actually pick a non-fiction book. I hadn't picked any out yet. I was debating because there's ones that I would like to read that I don't think you guys would like the history of Sierra, the video game company. You know, I would love all that, but I get the feeling you guys might not be interested. So anyway, today, a comment was posted on Book Notification I had to approve, and it was someone replying and talking about a book, and they wrote, "I purchased this book for several people. I chose it for a book club. If it would have a positive impact on just a smidgen of the millions of people who have read it, saw the movie, watched any of the programs, the world would be a better place. I know a lot of volunteers in the volunteer work I do. I don't know if they've read the book. The people I know who have read the book make comments about how they used to volunteer. And I wonder if reading it might affect different people at different times, ages in their lives." And they basically said how important it was. It was someone called Joe. So thank you, Joe, for this. The book is Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. It's about a former student who reunites with his dying college professor for one last class every Tuesday, discovering timeless lessons on love, living, and what it really means to die well. So Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom.
Tuesdays with Maury. Have you read this, Ange?
Yes. But I will read it again.
Well, that's a good sign of a good book. So that is what we're going to be reading for episode 10. That seems like a pretty big number. I'm very proud of all of us. And Vince will be back by then. Yes, Graham?
Yeah, he should be. And actually, there's an adaptation of this one as well. So maybe Vince, being one of the adaptations experts with Book Notification, can watch the movie as well, which stars Jack Lemmon and Hank Azaria, and talk about that as well. So we can have a little extra to the book.
Amazing.
Chat
All
next
right.
week.
Let's run it down one more time. Graham, out of 10 bells for the Bittlemores.
8.
Angela, out of 10 bells.
8.
Awesome. And I'm giving it a 9. Recommended Jan Arden's, her debut fiction novel. There you go, Angela, got it there for you. Her debut fiction novel, The Bittlemores. Make sure you pick that up and have a read of it because it was a fabulous book. We'll be back next month for our next podcast episode, episode 10, where we'll be reading Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom. Looks like it's going to be a fabulous book, so make sure you join us for that. And don't forget to head on over to booknotification.com, sign up, subscribe, and get notified. Thanks, guys.